See, there's some folks in the chat right now, which is awesome. Thanks, friends. Give it a few minutes, see if anybody else wants to jump in. It's getting a bit of that week 5 feeling now. I think people might be thinking about their assessments, maybe a mid-semester exam or two that some folks might have. Thanks for following me on Twitch. I got a thing on Twitch. There's some kind of thing, affiliate-ness or something. Thank you for following me. That means I got to be an affiliate. And I should set up a kind of alternate income stream with sponsors. This stream brought to you by, what is the things I use? Presonus audio interfaces or something. Corsair, they sponsor all the streams in the world, don't they? Could be brought to you by Squarespace. There's a few people walking in now. Great to see you folks. Thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, I gotta make sure I open my editor window. Log in. Because we're going to do some more demos today. A few more demos. When will we get our name tag graded? Boy, you guys cut straight to the chase, don't you? I get about 3 days before the questions start rolling in. G'day folks, great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me this lovely Monday morning, week 5, Comp 1720. I'm just going to make sure everything's good on my monitor over here. That one's not good. I always have to monitor my stream a little bit because I do wonder if things go wrong. I always wonder about that issue with Microsoft Stream that we had weeks ago in the first week. That was really very frustrating to find that not working right. I think so far since then Microsoft Stream has been much better. I've been seeing the streams work fine and have no issues. I'm just going to start my recording here. Now my recording started. Welcome again to week 5, Comp 1720. I do need to take a recording because I like to put the lecture on Echo 360. There are people who watch it on Echo 360 and I know about it. They do tend to jump in afterwards and get that done. So, week 5 objects. Thank you for joining me this morning. This is, in some ways, you know, it's the end of an era. It's the end of our sprint through code topics in Comp 1720, or in terms of, I guess, programming paradigms or programming tools that you need. And for the rest of the semester, we will use these tools to do more advanced stuff. And I guess one of the things which we will start to do is to interact with things more in the libraries that are provided with P5 or different libraries that can connect with it, and using the coding knowledge that you'll now have of objects, conditionals, arrays, functions, variables, and flow. And you'll be able to use that body of knowledge to interact with a lot of really exciting parts of P5 and build more interesting and kind of, what should I say, detailed artworks that interact with the world, artworks that interact with users, and artworks that are dynamic and interesting. So this is our last kind of programming concept. But if you've been finding that it's a real stressful time to keep up with the programming concepts in these lectures, maybe it'll be a sigh of relief from you. What I should say is next week in the code lecture, we will only be doing a recap. It's just a revision lecture, just to make sure that everyone's up to date with everything we've done, showing maybe some more examples. And what I will also say is that the week 5 and week 6 labs, I think they step up a little bit in terms of difficulty, in particular the week 6 lab. It's a bit of a bit of a challenge, perhaps, for those who have not done any programming before. So, you know, that's the one to go to. That's one where I really hope that everyone will attend their lab. If you're really comfortable with your work, please help someone who's not. If you're not comfortable with your work, please make sure you get your hand up in that lab, in the team, in the online chats. Let your tutor know what you need from them. And if you want to have a little go at that lab beforehand, getting some questions in on the discourse forum would be a very good idea. So, admin, where are we at with the course? Assignment 1, marking is underway. Someone was already asking me, when does the marks come out? When do the marks come out? Well, we do try to get marks done within 2 weeks. And I'm very much hoping that we can get your mark to you next Monday. So you handed in an assignment on Wednesday. And so I'll hopefully get it a little bit before the 2 weeks. So you'll have it well in time to internalize the feedback you get and think about your second assignment. Assignment 2 is out now. Assignment 2, from today, you have 2 weeks to do it. These are not huge assignments, so 2 weeks is plenty to get this one done. In fact, it certainly doesn't require that much time. The assignment spec is on the website. The assignment repository is now available. I'll just show you the assignment spec. Your goal with this assignment is to create a picture window that's interactive. So you'll need to be paying attention to your work in labs this week and next week to help with that. I've had some folks now starting to ask questions about it on the forum, which is fantastic. Great to know that there are people who are getting into this assignment already and thinking about what they want to do. The crucial thing with this assignment is to make sure that you are following the specification and that you're following the requirements. We still require that thumbnail.png image file in the top level. Someone said no one replied yet, lol, Ali, in my chats. Well, I'll probably reply today. Make sure your artist statement is relevant. We'll talk more about artist statements next week. And as always, if you have questions or ideas about this, get into the forum. We do answer every question in the forum, so they will get answered eventually. The final thing to mention is the course survey. So your wonderful course rep team have put together a survey, which is available in somewhere. It's gotten lost already, would you believe? There it is. I've pinned it, but it hasn't been pinned for me. I think there's better, more intense ways to pin things. I'm going to make it a banner topic. No, I'm not going to do that right now. I'll figure it out later. But the course survey is available. Sneha, Bowen, Ojas, and Cecilia are asking you to, here's the link from Cecilia. Thank you so much. Wanting you to fill out this survey, and they're really looking for an answer by Tuesday, 12 noon AEST. So hopefully getting an answer today. We'll be communicating with all students about this survey. I'll hope to send out some more in-depth things. This is it's not a hugely long survey. It's just a little bit of information. What course are you taking? Are you full-time? Are you located in Canberra? On a spectrum between coder and artist, where would you put yourself? And then some few questions about how you're keeping up with the content, if there's things that are new for you, what the workload's like, and some free text responses if you want to. Please, please, please fill out the survey. At least go through and click the little number boxes that only take about a minute to do. It gives us so much great information, and when I get information from a survey with the course reps, we do actually adjust the course. So if there's something that's really bothering you or you really want to tell us about it, let me know in the survey and we will know more about it. Also, the survey is a great way for you folks to know about yourself in some way. You can know about who your colleagues are, what your cohort is like, who are the people taking this course. And I think it builds our sense of community. So please do get into the survey and talk about it. I just want to say something else about the forum before I start the lecture. If I go all into Comp 1720 and I go none, so no subcategory, I should be seeing no pre-lab posts here, but I am seeing some pre-labs. Pre-lab. This one doesn't have the week tag either. If your pre-lab is not in the right category and you don't have the week tag on it, it's not going to get marked. So folks, make sure you go back and really, really check out or remember to fix your pre-lab posts, make sure they're in the right spot. It has been great to see some pre-labs with different folks' name tags in them, talking about them. Just so wonderful to hear you in your own voice talking about your name tag. In some way, I wish people would do that more in their artist statement. So the way you talk about it on the forum is usually somehow more interesting than the way you talk about it in your artist statements. Assignments can be like that sometimes. Okay, that doesn't apply to everybody. I'm sure there are some wonderful artist statements out there, many wonderful artist statements, but sometimes, it's an assignment. People have a frame of formality, which is not always so much fun to read, particularly when you have to read 200 of them. Okay, moving on with the contents. A little recap. What did we do last week? We looked at 2 different ways of packaging up stuff. A function is a way of packaging up a bunch of JavaScript lines of code, a bunch of operations. And an array is a way of packaging up a bunch of JavaScript variables or values. So 2 things that can be packaging things together. And today we're going to look at another way of packaging things together, the third and final way. But let's just have a little recap of these 2 things, because we will use these techniques in today's lecture. Here's the syntax for a function. You're probably really familiar now with how to structure operations. No stroke, fill, make an ellipse, change the fill color, make another ellipse. And with function, we're taking those operations and putting them inside a block with these, oops, where's my little drawing thing? With these little open and close curly brackets, putting it inside a block, and then we're nominating some variables which are going to be the parameters of our function. So whenever we call this function, draw I, we put in some numbers for the parameters or variables to put values into those parameters, and those numbers get plugged into wherever those variables appear within our function. X, there's Y, there's I size, there's another I size, and then again down here. And in our little demo last week related to the bugs, which we'll look at a bit more this week, the really great thing about functions was that we could make a function to do an operation that we were going to do many times, and then if we wanted to change it, we only have to change it in one place. And so it's really handy for that reason, changing things once in one place and then acting on those operations many times in a sketch. Okay, another function. This was one that returns a value bigger than 4. This returns a Boolean value, which is, whoops, not always the way we want to use these, but it's often the way we do it in other computer science courses. But this one's going to calculate, take the parameter value, calculate whether value is greater than 4, and then return that number. Arrays, our second bit of syntax from last week, important syntax, packaging numbers together. This was the way we make an array. This is the way we make an array. It's the kind of thing I sing to my baby all the time, but not about arrays. About putting washing in the washing machine or something. This is the way we hang up the clothes, hang up the clothes, hang up the clothes. This is the way we hang up the clothes so early in the morning. Boy, if I did this whole course in song, I think I'd lose all my followers on Twitch very quickly, but there you go. X values, we've got a list of values, and I've put them in between square brackets, and that's how I declare and initialize an array. And then I can access things from that array back using square brackets again. So X values is the name of the array. X values in brackets 0 will give me the first value. Remember, the first value has the index 0. And this one's going to be the third value. So we're going to set the third value to be 544. And then there were these other words we could use to set values that would just push one onto the end, or unshift one onto the start, or pop one off the end, or shift it off the start. So we had that little diagram of adding things to the front and back, adding, removing objects, adding it to the front, adding it to the back. So you can refer to that little matrix as you need these things. I think I like to use push to put things onto an array. Push and pop are pretty useful. Shift and unshift, we don't tend to have so much need to put things on the front of an array, but it's good to know that you can. But putting things onto the end of an array were always really useful, and I think I showed you a good demonstration of how you would use that with the bugs, because I'd set up some arrays for the X values, etc. So I'd have like bugs X, or bug X's equals empty array, declared and initialized it, and then in my code I had some kind of for loop, and in there I would say bug X's dot push something value, right? Some number that I'd worked out. So why was this helpful? Should we make myself small actually? I've been big the whole time. That's not going to make it easy to read my slides. Why was this useful? Because I could set up an array while inside a loop. I didn't know how many bugs I was going to need. So you could be adding an unknown number of things to an array, start with an empty array and push things on there, and then you've got this array full of stuff. Of course, if you ever, having built that array, you need to know how many things are in it. You can go bug x's dot length, and that returns the number of items in the array, which in this case, suppose there's no for loop, we just do that once, that will give you a 1. We pushed one value onto the array. Okay, time to get into objects. Getting into our objects. If you have any questions about functions or array that you need me to talk about, pop them into the chat and I might be able to pause in a minute and address those, but I think I haven't had too many questions so far, mainly just reminders from the course reps. Thanks folks, you guys are great. What is an object? I'm not thinking about programming right now, I just want to think about the world. What is an object? Boy, we had some objects early in the course, didn't we? Here's an object. Oop. Forgotten the course website. 60, lectures, week 1B. When we had art, what is art? This was an object, wasn't it? a fairy cup. And I think that actually the artistic kind of approach to what an object is helpful here, because in that art world, object is kind of used just to denote anything that you've kind of put on a pedestal, either figuratively or literally. And if you're putting it on a pedestal figuratively, that means we're just sort of setting it apart from other things in the world. So there's an object, an artistic object, and here is a non-artistic object, I guess a banal object, which is a watch. That's what you could say it is. And a question we might have is, well, how do you describe this thing to someone who hasn't seen it? So if you or I just see it, well, we know what it is. But if we have to make a description of it, which would give us all the important information about it, what would that description be? Well, we could start off by saying, okay, it's a watch, but in the whole kind of category of things that are called watches, is it a pocket watch or a wrist watch? A wrist watch, okay, there's the second thing. Is it digital or analog? This one's digital, okay. What brand is it? It's a Casio. Does it have a color? Yes, it's black. What's it made of? Is it metal or plastic? It's plastic. Okay, so does it have, how many buttons does it have? It looks like this one has 3 buttons. Does it have a light? Yes, this one has a little light. So there's little descriptive names we can use to describe an object. So in some way, we can describe this to someone who's never seen it before by having a list of properties with values. So something like black, that's a value. There's lots of colors, black, red, blue, all of those would be different color values. Maybe there would be some values that are just a couple of options, like the brand of the watch could be different options. Casio, Sharp, Timex, etc. For wristwatch or pocket watch, there's really only 2 options, I guess. There's not other kinds of watches. Someone's suggesting that a ghost exists. Well, does it? That depends on your point of view. I guess if your experience is that ghosts exists, then yeah, but within ghosts, you know, I suppose you could go down a Wikipedia hole on all the different kinds of ghosts that people have claimed or imagined would exist. Some ghosts are like a person, some are just a spirit that wasn't connected with a person. Some ghosts have like a form, and some don't have a form, and some just throw objects, and some don't. So there's lots of ghosts, or different things that could be called a ghost. So the point of this little exercise was, I guess, to suggest that we often need not just one piece of information, but multiple attributes to fully describe a thing. So if you had a student, we could say a student's name is their identifier, but sometimes we have a lot of students and some of them have the same name. So it's good to know their uni ID, maybe their date of birth could help DI. If that was a secret information, we could have unique ways of identifying students based on what course they're in, what their date of birth was, what their uni ID is, etc. When we think about an address, a house, we have a street name, a street number, maybe a unit number, maybe a level on a building. If there's a pet, it can have a name, species, breed, owner. So in JavaScript and lots of other programming languages, there will be a syntactical idea called objects, which will be a way of describing a thing by keeping some related information together, related bits of data. And what you might notice about these bits of data is that they're all different, right? That's a string, that's a number, that might be a number. We got a postcode, a number. You know, town, that'd be a string. That's a string, that's a number. That could be a number if it was a program code or something. So the idea of an object is keeping information together that describes something, but it can be different kinds of information. Back to our little definitions idea. Well, one dictionary definition of an object is something mental or physical toward which thought, feeling, or action is directed. So that's sort of a grammatical version of what an object is. And then a computer science version of an object, a data structure in an object-oriented programming language that can contain functions as well as data, variables, and other data structures. So far we're thinking about this definition, and we're thinking about the fact that objects ought to contain data or variables. Those are kind of the same thing, aren't they? This is a bit of a circular definition, isn't it? That objects are in object-oriented programming. Well, most programming languages include some object features, so you could call them object-oriented. That was a movement more than 20 years ago to use objects within programming languages as a good way to structure our data, which was incredibly successful and very widely used in lots of programming languages. Even ones which aren't object-oriented usually have some object features. Okay, so let's make an object. We'll make a Pokemon. What are the descriptors of this Pokemon? What properties does a Pokemon have? Well, it's got a species. That Pokemon would be a Pikachu, correct? A particular Pokemon within the group of Pokemons called Pikachus would have a level. Maybe this is a level 12 Pikachu. It would have a number of hit points. Its health before it. So if you send your Pokemon into battle, you're being an unethical trainer of Pokemons, send it into battle for, or isn't there some way that you could be an ethical trainer? They're in battles for good, but they don't really hurt each other or something. It's just the whole ethical implications of Pokemon battles has never really made sense to me. Anyway, they've got a number of health points before they faint. Oh, we've got some more properties in the chat. They've got different kind of stats for their abilities, right? Their attack stat and their defense stat and special defense, special attack. Probably the Pokemon would also have an owner, and they usually have a nickname or something, right, as well. So we've got a whole class of different things that Pokemons can have, and when we keep this information together, it would hopefully describe exactly one Pokemon in the world. So here's a way of doing this in JavaScript. So we're going to say let Sally, that's going to be the nickname of this Pokemon, equal open curly bracket, species Pikachu, level 1, HP 100, owner Ash, and captured true. So we've got lots of different kinds of types of variables here. We've got strings, we've got some numbers, and we've got a Boolean. And this is our first time we've seen this way of describing a JavaScript object. So a way of putting all this information together and describing something. So let's just go through this in excruciating detail. But well, looking at this example, the way to describe it, to say I'm going to make an object in JavaScript, is to use the curly brackets. We used the square brackets to describe an array, right? And we're using the curly brackets to describe an object. Oh no, you might complain. Haven't you already used the curly brackets for a code block? Remember, if, then, else. They used curly brackets as well. We got those curly brackets there for code blocks in if and else. Well, sometimes in programming we do use the same symbols for different things. I guess in this case, it's clear that what's coming in between those curly brackets is going to be code because you started out with an if and a condition. And in this case, you've started out with a variable declaration and an equal sign for assignment. And then we're using the curly bracket as our signpost to JavaScript to say, I want to have an object here. And then within those curly brackets, we're going to have a number of lines with a name for a property, a name for a property, name for a property, a colon symbol, and then the value for the property. Doop, boop, boop, boop. Someone's already jumped in and said, oh no, I've learned about Java, objects in Java, and this is a little bit different than Java. Well, I think I probably mentioned at the start of this course, week 1, that JavaScript and Java are completely different things. They have little to no relation. Java in no way equal to JavaScript. I mean, there's really very little similarity between these two things, except that the syntax is a little bit similar between Java and JavaScript. They're really quite different languages. So objects in Java is one of these object-oriented languages coming out in the 90s, where people were psyched about using objects. It has a very, what I would say is quite a complex approach to doing objects. JavaScript has a much more simple approach to using objects, and we are taking, in this course, probably just talking about the simplest way to do an object in JavaScript. There are other ways, but we're doing the simplest one because it's the one which is most useful to most folks when they're using them within P5. Okay, back to my description about these things. We'll go through this in detail. So, object vocabulary. Each object is going to have some components or different variables that you can name, you can get out, you can set, and the descriptors of that object. Each of these components is going to be called a property, and each property has a name and a value. So this one here, that's going to be a property. There's the name, and there's the value. So we have to remember that our objects also have a name. So this object happens to be called Sally, the variable name of that object, and then it also has other names inside it. So Sally's is the name of the whole object, and then HP is the name of one of its properties. I think this is one of these slides. We use the function slide to say we have two different languages going on here. One is normal everyday English language, which I speak natively. Everyone else in the class speaks either natively or as a language that they've learned in their life. We also have a language of specific words that are used to describe specific things within JavaScript. And some of those words are the same as other languages within computer science, and some of them are just very JavaScript specific. So in everyday language, we often have these interchangeable words: property, attribute, characteristic, trait, aspect, and they kind of all mean the same thing in everyday English. But in programming, they're different things. So objects only have properties. They don't have aspects or traits or characteristics or attributes. They've got properties. Okay, object syntax. Here's just what I was discussing before. We were on that big slide. You had these squiggly braces that were denoting the front and the back of an object. And there's 3 examples of doing this that are all exactly the same, in fact. And this is a bit weird sometimes because we often assume that this looks right to me and this one somehow doesn't look right because the line breaks are in a different place. But in fact, JavaScript doesn't care. These are all exactly the same as far as JavaScript is concerned. This one probably looks a little bit nicer to people, so it's often a good idea to use white space in a particular way to help people read it, but in general these are all the same. So the spaces don't matter, only the braces. I think someone's just asked a question which I want to just address. So they've said, can we create a new class for objects in JavaScript? Yes-ish. What we're discussing right here, this is sort of deeper level JavaScript lingo. This is a way of making a what we call a literal object. So we're just announcing to JavaScript that we have an object. There's also a thing called a class within object-oriented programming, which is kind of like a factory for making Pokemons in some sense. So you've got this idea of a Pokemon as being an abstract thing with data which isn't filled in. So sometimes in object-oriented programming, class is like the more abstract concept, and an object is an instance of that. So Sally is an instance of a class of things called Pokemons. There's another way to do this in JavaScript. Gene in the chat has said that they're so good, so maybe Gene can write us a primer on how to do it on the forum. Because we don't go into that in these lectures, we're just looking at only how to do objects as literals in our lecture today, because that's really mostly what you need. Do it, Gene. Yeah, Gene's going to do it. Give me an object and classes primer in the forum, and just make sure that if you do that, sort of tag it as like off or extension work, because it's not something which we really are focused on within this class. This is a class that focuses 50% on beginning programming concepts and 50% on using them to make artworks. So we don't go into huge amounts of detail over every aspect of JavaScript syntax. Okay, what can we do with an object? What can we do with a drunken sailor? Just like with arrays, there are things we might want to do with our objects. Get values of properties, we call that accessing the property. Set or updating the value of a property, and we might actually want to add a new property and value, which you can also do. So we can change an object after it's been created. Here's how we get objects properties. There's two ways to do it, two syntaxes. First way is just to use a dot after the object and then type in the name of that object, the name of that property, I mean. So Sally is the object, species is the property, and that should give us Pikachu. Second way is to use square brackets, which should give us, do the same thing. So within the square brackets, then you have to have quote marks around the name of your property. The first one is the one I prefer, because I think it looks kind of, I think it looks rather elegant just to have the name of an object and then a dot and then the name of the property, don't you? This one's a bit fussy, so, you know, blah, don't like that one. They're literally the same, so it's up to your preference which you would use. I would generally always choose to pick this one unless I absolutely had to do this other way. And there are some cases where you absolutely have to do the other way. So this image is sort of one of these inspirational images, but it's like you're keeping all these properties in a little bag. And by getting a property, you're reaching into your bag to get it. So you have to tell your object which property you want, and then you can reach in and get that number back. So when to use the dot syntax, pro is a bit easier to type, and I think it's more elegant. Cons, this is not going to work if the property name isn't a string. What? Property name isn't a string. So in fact, there are instances where you can make an object where the property name is a number and not a string. And in that case, then you won't be able to do benObject.5. It will get an unexpected number error. It's a funny error to get. If you do benObject in brackets 5, you will get this property associated with that name or value associated with it, which is howdy. You might start thinking, well, wait a minute, that looks an awful lot like arrays, doesn't it? Well, you would be very right in that thought. Setting the value of a property. So similarly, just like with arrays, you can assign new values to properties, and we just use the equal sign or assignment operator, which we have been using all along. So the equal sign, Sally.species equals Raichu. So in this case, Sally has evolved, done some battles, you know, sweated, grown, become stronger, grown levels, and has decided to turn into a Raichu through that amazing evolution process. And then we can modify the value of this property, species. So Sally.species equals Raichu. You can do it the same way with the square brackets. Sally brackets species equals Raichu. No difference between those. Updating the value of a property. I guess this is like one we often do, updating a property. We did this with the bugs last week with arrays. This was the typical kind of syntax we've been doing so far. Sally.hp equals Sally.hp minus 10. And then there's a little quick shortcut for that. Sally.hp minus equals 10 is a classic computer science shortcut for setting and getting an object, a property at the same time. You can do that with variables as well, right? If you had let elephant equal 100, you can say elephant plus equals 25, and then elephant will equal 125. Because we're a beginning programming course, I tend not to go into these syntactical tricks too much. They're something that many folks will use all the time and find them really helpful, but it's a little bit confusing to try to learn them all on the same day as you're learning what an object is. So don't worry about it if you haven't seen it before. Sometimes you might actually want to add a new property to an object. I don't think it's something which is going to be super useful, but it could happen. But it does turn out that in JavaScript, if you just announce to an object that you would like to set a property, say Sally.hat, and it doesn't have the hat property, that property will automatically be created. Totally going to create this hat property just for you. And again, these two lines of code are the same, dot version and the brackets version. And then after you've done that, you can use it in your code. So if Sally has a hat, then draw a hat or something. It's a bit of a silly example, but it's possible. How can things go wrong here? Well, if you try to get a property which an object doesn't have, then it will not break completely, but it will return a value called undefined. So if you say Sally.pants and try to print that, you will get undefined. Everyone knows Pikachu don't wear pants except when they do. Dare I see where that goes? In Detective Pikachu, did Pikachu wear pants? I've forgotten. I think I watched that movie on a plane once, and I just like, was it a dream or was it real? It just seemed like it was something that shouldn't have occurred. Maybe it was a bad dream. Maybe you wake up and find out that it's true. Okay. So you do get that undefined. Again, similar to arrays, when we were looking at arrays, if you accessed an index of that array which hadn't been set yet, you would get this undefined value back. Your program doesn't completely break, but it probably won't do what you want it to if you get undefined and you start using undefineds around the place. Okay, why should you care? Well, this seems like unnecessary syntactical garbage, Charles. Why are you telling me all this? I already know how to use variables. I know how to use arrays. I can use the P5 reference. And I don't have any particular want so far to make Pikachus or make Pokemon in my sketches. Why should I know about it? Well, you actually are using objects all the time in your code. So if you were using colors, you're manipulating objects. If you're taking some value from P5 in the reference, maybe you haven't done this yet actually, because it only comes up when you start to use libraries in more depth. Often a library will return to you something which, as it turns out, is an object. So you can get inside these programming elements and access the parts of them again. So in all of this code, all these examples, they're creating colors using lots of different ways of doing it. The color function has many different parameters that are possible, and they're getting back C, which is an object related to that color. Does it say returns? Returns a p5.color. All right. So we do use objects all the time in our sketches, even if we don't create new ones. There's a really one you maybe haven't looked at yet, but will come up in the second assignment, actually. If I look at the GitLab, no, it's not going to have logged in. Come on, there's my identity. If we look within our assignment 2 sketch, the first thing that it does is load an image, and then that image is stored as an object, background image. So in fact, anytime you've got a thing which is not a number, and it's not a Boolean, and it's not a string, and it's not undefined, it's actually likely to be an object. And that's probably because in JavaScript there are really only that many types. What are the types in JavaScript? Just have a look on the thing. There are only this many types of things in JavaScript. Booleans, null, undefined, number, big int, we don't use that much, string, symbol, and objects. So really we only have 2 kinds of things: primitive types, things that are just a value, and objects that are collections of values. So in this example, the idea is to load an image within P5 to display, and you can actually print it out. Why don't we run this? I don't know how I'm going to do it in the web editor. I'd like to see what happens. Should have copied and pasted. Copy. I'm going to have to upload an image from somewhere. Unsplash, give me an image. There we go, a Laker. Download. That's 6.9 megabytes. Okay. I wonder if we can just upload it into our sketch here. Create folder, assets, upload file. Where was the last one? Oh, it was this one. Someone else's Unsplash thing. Oh, it was a dog. I'll use that one. Tick, got it. Okay. Preload. Well, maybe. I mean, that's only if you want it to work, would you use preload. I've forgotten what preload, like. Here we go. I'm going to copy that name. Copy back to my sketch. This will work. It's going to run. It's just not going to be maybe as pretty as if you used preload. Preload is another function that you can use to do things even before setup. So setup happens first, then draw happens, draw. Preload can happen before setup. So the reason I wanted to show you this wasn't to actually display the image, although we can do that. I've forgotten how to display an image. Someone tell me. Image. Yeah, there we go. I mean, it's moments like these when you realize that your teacher has many things on their mind, and sometimes important information like how to display an image in P5 drops out of their brain during the lecture when they're trying to live code. There's my doggo. I've displayed it in my sketch now. Okay, whew, got there. Now, why was I doing this? I was going to show you something about this object, which I've named image. So I defined a variable. I've assigned this variable to an image object. In my draw loop, I'm showing you what it is, which is a doggo. But in my, after I've loaded, I've actually printed out information about it. I can see that here in the console. And so here is a bunch of information about this image. This is what is actually loading, what the image object looks like on the inside. So it's got a lot of properties here: width, height, canvas. This is some HTML information. Drawing context, that's some stuff for P5 to know about. Pixel state, some stuff for P5 to know about. And then a really important thing of this image is this thing called pixels. Well, that's actually where the image is stored, the actual image data. So maybe print image.pixels. See what happens now. Oh, it's empty. Well, maybe not. Whoop. Ooh, pixel state. I don't really know how images work in JavaScript, but it's fun to use the print command to actually dive into an object and see what's in it. So if you're wondering about how to manipulate things in JavaScript and P5, start using print within P5 just to find out what these things are. Why don't we make a Pokemon while we're here? Let Sally equals, species equals Pikachu. I need to have a comma after that, not a semicolon. HP equals 100. Owner equals Charles. Captured equals true. They're the wrong, it's not equal signs, is it at all? It's a colon. That's not a colon, it's a semicolon. There we go. Doing it completely wrong. You folks all know how to do this better than me. Okay, and I'm going to print Sally just to show you how fun it is to look at objects using the print command. There's my Sally object, and there's all of its important information, all those properties. This is another classic P5 object which you might want to play with. So a vector is an object which contains multiple numbers for multiple dimensions. So normally you're dealing with x and y separately for specifying things, but a vector would have that x and y packaged up together. So usually vectors are in 2D. They're referring to a place in a 2D plane, x and y, or they could be 3D, x, y, and z. And they're really useful when you want things to move about the screen. So maybe we should do some vector work later, but when you're creating vectors, you end up with properties. So let v1 equal, you end up with objects, sorry. This vector here, let v1 equals create vector. Let's print it out and see what there is. There's our vector. X, Y, we didn't need a Z. And it's got some other stuff. This thing called constructor, which we don't need to know about. That's part of the mechanics of JavaScript, making objects in ways that are more complicated and we don't teach you how to do. And then it's got another property called P5, which is full of another object with some important information for P5's use and not for us to see. But the main properties would be X, Y, and Z that we can access. Oops, stay on page. I need that to come back later. All right. Can we have objects within objects? Of course. Just like we had arrays within arrays. You could have a car with paint, and the paint might be another object with lots of descriptors for that paint. And then you can go car.paint.color. So objects within objects. How are we going to find the value of this? Well, car is that variable. Dot paint is this parameter. this property, sorry, and then dot color is going to be red, so that will return red as a string. Arrays and objects together. You can have arrays that are a property of an object. You can have an array of objects. This one's a really useful one. We'll try that in a minute. And you can also have arrays inside objects. So in this example, poker hand, the property hearts would be storing which heart cards you had in your hand. So 2, 5, and 7. Diamonds, you had the 8 of diamonds, the queen of diamonds, the king of diamonds, and we didn't have any spades. So you can combine arrays and objects in useful ways for storing different types of stuff. So I guess the question, I've hinted at this a few times so far, but you might think, well, this is looking very similar to the arrays stuff from last week. A lot of this stuff looks really familiar. Well, the reason for that is that it turns out that in JavaScript, an array is actually a special type of object. Arrays are objects. They're specifically objects where the property names are the numbers, 0, 1, up to the length of the array. And then they have another property name called length, which is the length of that array. They're just objects. So when you know how to use objects, you also know how to use arrays. So which should I use? Should I be using an object or an array? I guess the rule of thumb here is that if you have several related values with different types, then you would use an object. And if you've got a bunch of things that are the same, and you want to just have those same things in a big list, you would use an array. I guess some folks you could end up in a tangle where you were making an object for like first lamp, second lamp, third lamp, fourth lamp with different property names for each of the lamps you were talking about. And in that case, it might just have been better to use an array for that. So this slide is again to say that JavaScript is complicated. Web programming is complicated. The notes here helping you to understand how to use objects is just one way to do it, actually. There are other ways, which folks have hinted at. It's definitely a jungle out there on the web. If you Google, how do I make a JavaScript object, you'll get like 10 different pages with 10 different ways of doing it. And all of them will be right, or they will have been right at a time, or they will be right for a certain purpose. But the way that I'm showing you how to do is called object literals. You're just making the object right there inside those curly brackets at the same time as you're assigning it to an object. So don't despair. As long as you understand the concept here, that's really important. And when you practice and understand the concept well, then it's much easier to learn these other ways and fill in gaps in your knowledge over time. All right. Little break for a minute, just rest my voice. We're almost at the end of the content of this lecture, and then I'll do a bit of a demo time. So first code block. This seems legit. So far, so good. Let point equal object x is 100 and y is 200. That seems fine. We know how to do that. What about this other one? Let point equal start object x is 100, and then next property red background function open bracket close bracket block background 255000. What? Is this okay? Can someone jump in the chat and tell me if this is all right or not? I've got a property here, and that's the name of the property, and the value of a property is in fact a function. What's all that about? Should have my question music. I had a little question slide. Someone says it seems fine to them. Yeah, totally. Seems fine to me. Me too. Yeah, it does. It seems a bit confusing, right? Oh, Marcus has a different kind of syntax for it. Yeah, I would prefer that syntax too. But again, just to write out what they've suggested, they would suggest it should have red background, so BG, and then open bracket, close bracket, equals, right arrow, curly bracket, and then the function body. As I said before, right, this is a course which is beginning. There are often different ways of writing the same thing. Ooh, yes. Someone says it's definitely ES6 syntax. That is one of the names of a version of JavaScript. ES6. Often JavaScript was the first name of this language, but in actual fact, the current language is called ECMAScript, not JavaScript, because Java being a kind of copyright name for another language, they had to use a different way of describing it. Anyway, let's get into some details here. This is actually okay. It is completely fine. I'm going to use a green tick. Green. Tick, tick, tick. Really good. You are allowed to have a property of an object where the value is a function. And when that happens, it's actually called a method. It's just a method is just a special kind of function. No more guessing. Have a try in the editor. I want to talk about it a little bit more. Someone's made a really good point that this is often not the preferred syntax, but this is the way of doing it with an object literal. And I did say I wasn't doing any other type of object descriptions. They've used the word prototype. Look, I'm still not sure if I understand how prototypes work in JavaScript, but you can teach me. This is allowed. This is making a function within an object. And then you can call that function like this, point dot red background, open bracket, close bracket. This is the problem with JavaScript. Whenever you want to learn something, you Google for it, how do I do prototypes in JavaScript? And as I said before, you get 10 different pages with 10 different ways of doing it. And it's not like, it's never really clear which is the correct way and which is just someone's crazy dream that they wrote down. So you can use this object, red background. There's another way of writing it where instead of writing the word function, we write this little bunch of characters together. Totally fine as well. This way is shorter. This way is the way I've taught you to write a function so far. And, you know, having the word function in there does suggest that it's actually a function, which is useful. I suppose a deeper sort of question is, even though this is fine by the syntax, the rules of JavaScript, is it actually a good idea in your program? So here's the question. Is it a good idea that if I have a variable called a point, that variable includes a method which just makes the background red? And in fact, it doesn't really, this function doesn't have anything to do with the pointsness of this. So a point, you'd expect it to include an x and a y. You wouldn't expect it to include a function that makes the background red. So it's a bit of a really weird thing to do. Even though it's allowed in programming, it's weird to have done this. If we had some function which operated on the x and y of the point and did something with it, maybe it gave us the distance from 0, 0 or something, the magnitude, then that might be useful. But in this case, it doesn't seem like a useful function to add. So I guess that's the point of the discussion here. Thanks, folks, for jumping in with some really interesting points about JavaScript. Okay, so what if the property is a function? Then we call it a method. A function's a value, just like a number. No, functions aren't objects. I don't think. I think they can just take the place of a value within the objects, and in that case they're a method. Oh, another name, back in this name vocabulary soup, alphabet soup of names. Methods are really similar to functions, but they're just attached to a particular object. One of the cool things about methods is that you can use them to refer to properties of that object which it belongs to. And I'll show you the syntax for doing that in a little bit. It's kind of neat sometimes if you have an object that can kind of do things to itself. Like you could have an evolve function for your Pokemon object, which might like make it evolve, no matter what kind of thing it is. Oh, there you go. Almost anything in JavaScript can be considered an object. So I'm likely that it is an object. Now, where was I? Sorry, I was looking at my other screen for a minute. An example here, a good example would be to look at the p5.vector object. So this is a thing that we can, vectors are, as I said before, they're going to be a thing that encapsulates an x value and a y value. So in some sense, I'm just going to hack my way through this. I don't want to go into too much detail. Let me just skip ahead and see what else we have to look at. Oh, nothing else. It's time for demos. Further reading, watching. Have a look at the Dan Schiffman's stuff on objects. You can look at the MDN article on objects. There's also a chapter in the textbook about it, I think. So they're good things to look at. We'll have a look at this demo. I want to do 2 demos actually. I might have a hack around with this vector, and then we're going to look back at the bugs and try those out. So first demo, window width, window height. And my background is grayish. Oops, sound page, start that again. Okay. So, you know, I'm gonna make a ball vector. We're gonna draw a ball, right? This is my ball. Fill 2550. We're back to the ellipse Olympics, blob Olympics. Ellipse, 100, 100, 75, 75. Is that too small? Okay, cool. We got my blob. We're going deep down a JavaScript path in the chat, which is always fun. So what are we going to do with it? I actually want to use a vector to ballvec. That's going to be the name of my location for the vector. I'm going to use a vector to encapsulate the location of this ball. So I'm going to use p5.vector. I'll just copy that line of code there. That's a good one. v1 equals create vector. So I'm using something from p5. Create vector is part of p5. I'm going to use my ballvec location. So far so good. I haven't used it yet. And now, if I just print ballvec, we can see what's in it. It's got that x value and y value, and those are what I want to use. So I'm going to go ballvec.x, whoops, and ballvec.y. I might make another variable up here, so we're just using all variables. which is going to make our code look kind of neat. Ball size. Cool. So now I'm using ball vec and ball y to draw my ball. So let's make a bit of code here. Draw ball code. And what I want to do in this sketch is actually make my ball bounce or move. So maybe I'm going to take away some of the y dimension of my vector in every frame. So gravity affect ball. I'm using gravity now. So I'm going to take ball vec dot y equals ball vec dot y minus 1. So in every frame, my ball is going to move down the screen. Oh, it's actually moving up. It shouldn't be plus, it should be mine. What a huge mistake, Charles. I thought that minus would make it go down the screen, but in fact it made it go up. Thanks, Gene. That looks really fun. We're going to see a way of learning. We're going to learn about how to do classes with JavaScript in the forum. Okay, now my ball is falling. So in fact, I've animated my ball. We've done that already, but I'm actually going to make another ball velocity vector, another vector. Which is going to be not just its position in x and y, but its speed in x and y. Create vector and it's going to be moving 0 in the x direction and 1 or 0 in the y direction. So when we start, create vector, create vector. Okay, I've got two vectors now. Ball vec and ball velocity vec. Okay, and velocity is going to affect the ball. You might hear some squeaks from my baby next door. She's in a squeaky mood, I think. Ball vec dot y plus ball velocity vec dot y. So I'm going to affect both the x and y dimensions of my ball. So far, so good. My ball isn't moving. But if I change its velocity in y, so it goes down the screen, it will start falling down. And if I change my velocity in x, it should move across the screen as well. Is this a good time to talk about plus equals? Oh, someone wants me to use plus equals. Okay. We can do this exact same thing. Ball vec dot y equals ball vec dot y plus ball velocity vec dot y with plus equals. So I can change that, put a plus there, and delete these two things, and that will have exactly the same effect. That's a good way of getting and setting a variable at the same time. Okay, so far so good. My ball moves across the screen. In fact, you can. Someone suggested that you can just use vector plus vector, but I wanted to show you how to use the getting and setting of properties. So it would, yeah, I think you might have to do add or something, vector add. v1 dot add v2 if you want to add two vectors without doing this, but I wanted to practice using properties. Okay, now so far my velocity affects my ball, but in fact gravity should be affecting velocity. So my ball should be changing due to gravity. So I'm going to take ball velocity vec dot y and every frame I'm going to increase its y speed by 1. So velocity is going to affect it as well. Oh, and now it looks like it's dropping off the screen. I might slow down gravity a little bit. 0.8, that's still too fast. And 6. 0.5, that's still pretty fast. This is where you have to sort of run your code a bunch of times and tune these kind of values. Okay, now we're going to have to do a little bit of testing now because I want to check whether this ball is going to bounce. So does ball bounce? So if a ball hits the deck, hits the bottom of the screen, its velocity should be becoming opposite in the y direction. So if ball vec.x is less than 0, y I mean, I wonder if this is going to work well. I think it sometimes works well, and sometimes you have to do a bit more cleverness to make it work perfectly. But I can probably make it work mostly well. Ball velocity vector dot y is going to need to change to be its opposite. So multiply it by -1 times equals -1. Oh, someone said greater than height. Absolutely right. Whew. That was a close one. It almost broke. Oh, it works. Hey, I've got a bouncing ball. Let's slow it down in the x direction. Boink. 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 Well, we've had a good time today making bouncing balls, haven't we? So, I think the point of this exercise was to use, seems to be getting faster each time, which is not usually how things work in the real world, is it? It gets higher and higher. That's not right. Someone's suggesting I set the bounce to be y equals -0.9. I think that's probably a better idea. So like when you hit the ground, you lose a little bit of energy. It's not a perfect bounce. Boink. Oh, that's a bit better. Boink. Boink. And then it gets sort of stuck. Yeah, so that's where it breaks. Why is it breaking? Well, like, it's not exactly that it's hitting the ground. It's like the center of the ball is going through the bottom of the screen. And if it gets so close and so slow that it doesn't move back fast enough, then this is going to happen multiple times and cause it to sort of get stuck, which is exactly what's happened. Maybe 0.95. Anyway, someone can come up with a perfect ball bouncing sketch. Why did I do this example? Well, not only because it's fun to do this kind of dynamic mechanical experiment, making a bouncing ball, but also because we got to use some properties of some objects that you might come across in JavaScript all the time in P5. This create vector object maker constructor is really useful. It's a really, really important part of P5 for making all kinds of artworks. People use them all the time. And just a way of packaging up X and Y values and being able to manipulate them more easily. I'd like that ball to bounce when it hits the deck, not when it goes past it. So I might just say ballvec.y plus 0.5 times ball size. So that should catch it so that just when it touches it. Uh-oh. Symbol. Oh, too many brackets. Whoops. Boink. That works a bit better. So when it just touches the bottom of the screen, it bounces back. What does create vector do? Well, create vector is making an object for you and returning it. So it's creating an object with those properties that you give it, x equals 40 and y equals 50, and then returning an object to you. Have a look in the reference. So the type of object is called a p5.vector. And then create vector is a handy function for creating new objects. Yeah. Okay, I think there was maybe some more detail in this sketch. I don't know what this sketch does, but I'm happier with my little bouncing ball. I'm going to go back to the bugs sketch that I did run. I'm going to call this one bouncing ball and add it to my, save it, and it should be added to something. Add to a collection, yeah. Add to my 2021 sketches. Okay, go back to my bugs. Glow bugs. How do they work again? Oh, there's my cool glow bugs. Now what I would like to do in this example, does a vector come with a shape of sorts? No, a vector isn't a shape at all. A vector is just, it's just a list of numbers. So the idea of a vector is that it's going to point to a spot on the screen. And it can either be in 2D space or 3D space. We usually only work in 2D in this course. So it's going to point to an XY location. And all it's doing is giving you a convenient way of packaging together an X number and a Y number, and then adding some extra mechanics to let you do things with them. So if you have a look in the P5.js documentation, I might go into more detail in vector on a later day, but you can see here that instead of letting v1 equal a number, let v1 equal 40, or let v2 equal 50. Absolutely, someone's asked if there's a place to find the sketches to find later. I put it in one place. I probably have it on the website. I might have to add it into the team later, but I have a collection of all of the different sketches that I do in lectures, except for ones I forgot to save. So v1.x is going to be at the x value of this vector called v1. v1.y is the y value. It doesn't have a shape. We're using those numbers to make an ellipse. We could change it to make a rectangle. Yeah, someone said to their colleagues that vectors are usually like an arrow pointing to a point in space. So I guess that's a bit confusing because it suggests that an arrow gets drawn or something, but the vector isn't to do with the arrow. It's just the place in space. We're just pointing to it in maths. Yeah, a point hanging out in space. Why would we need to have this mechanism to put together X and Y and Z? Well, it's because that when you're doing artistic programming with P5, we tend to deal with things in space all the time and things that are moving around in space. So having a vector is a really useful extra object. Just like it's useful to have something called image, which contains the data for an image. It would be annoying if we had to make that from scratch each time. It'd be annoying if we had to make up define what a color was each time. P5 gives us these objects, special objects for dealing with different types of thing that are useful for the specific task of making artworks with computing. Vectors also give you some methods or functions that let you do specific things with them. So v1.add v2 is going to add two vectors together. That would be useful if we were going to do that, adding of the velocity to my ball vector. But there's lots of other methods. I'm not going to go through these now. We might talk about it another time. Different things you can do with vectors. Copy them, multiply them, subtract them, divide them, get how far they are from 0, 0. Really useful stuff when you're dealing with a lot of things moving about in space. Okay, back to my bugs. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it objectified glow bugs. Don't objectify me. I'm going to objectify these glow bugs whether they like it or not. Now, what I'm going to do is delete all of these arrays. If you remember, last week we were talking about how to draw these bugs, and I made a function for drawing them. I've got this modify bug function. I'm just going to move that down the bottom so it's out of the way. A way of drawing a bug, it would have an X location, a Y location, and a brightness. So that was my function. And then I would have an array of the X locations of each bug, an array of the Y location for each bug, and an array of the brightness for each bug. And that was so far so good, right? We had 3 different arrays for the 3 properties of bugs. But what I want to do now is, instead of doing that, just have one array which is just going to contain all the bugs, and each bug is going to be represented by an object. So I'm going to get rid of all those guys. Bye-bye. Don't need those those arrays. Okay, so instead of all of this, I'm going to say let bug equal object, and it's going to have an X location. Now that I've told you about vectors, you could say, oh, just use a vector to do this. Well, yeah, it could, but I want to have that brightness as well. And maybe I want something else. So X location will be random width, comma. I still have the wrong syntax. Wrong. Couldn't be more wrong. Y location is random height, and the brightness is going to be random 50 to 55. Okay, there's my bug object, one bug object made, and I'm going to push that onto my array. Let bugs.push bug. Okay, delete that. I'm just going to not modify the bugs for a minute, get rid of that one. You could do this, there's some suggestion we could use vectors and just add brightness as a property. Yeah, we could do that, but I wanted to demonstrate making objects. So, of course, you can do things in computing lots of ways all the time, but I really wanted to demonstrate how I would make an object to improve this sketch, and I think you'll agree that it will look better. So rather than getting my draw bug to draw something with an X location, Y location, and brightness, I'm just going to get that to take one parameter, which will be a bug. And then the fill will be bug.brightness. Oops. Uh-oh. Bug.brightness, bug.brightness, bug.x, bug.y with a slightly random size. Okay. Now I haven't had I'm not moving my bugs so far, they're just sort of quivering in space like that. But so far I think that this is a nicer sketch. It's a bit more elegant. Rather than having 3 arrays to describe my bugs, I've just got one. And what does my array contain? It doesn't contain X's or Y's or brightnesses, it just contains bugs. So I've got an array of bugs, and then I iterate over my array, and I draw all the bugs. Now this is such a common thing to do that in fact there's a neater syntax to do it in JavaScript. We can do a for of the loop. Rather than having to go through the number of bugs, we can say for bug of bugs. This second bugs is the array, and this is the variable we're going to take out. Draw bug. We don't have to have any counters, we don't have to have any extra variables. We can just draw all of our bugs. That's a lot neater. Well, in this case, we can't really do that because we don't know, we can't do the same thing because we don't know the length of our array until we've created it. So we still need to have the counter up here. Let bug of bugs. I don't know what you mean, Gene. Let bug of bugs star. I don't know what that means. Anyway, this one seems to work, so. Oh. There it goes. It's happier now. Gotcha. Needed to have a let there. For let bug, that's like making sure this variable is defined in the correct way with a let of bugs. You can see JavaScript letting me get away with something dodgy just there, which was using bug as a global variable. I don't want to do that. I want to have a nice scope. Let's fix up the modify bugs so that it operates on a bug and not on the index of an array. So in fact, I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to do plus equals because I showed you how to do that now. Let bug.x. This is another bug.x. So I'm using the parameter that I've declared in the headline of my function, the first line of the function. Bug is going to be the parameter of the function, so I can now access its x, get and set the x property, Oh, that should be minus equals. Okay. Bug.y plus equals, whoops. And bug.y minus equals that. And then changing the brightness as well. Bug.brightness plus equals so now I should be able to modify bug as well. All right, now, any questions so far about this? I'm going to add it to my list of things so far, which I will send to you after the lecture. Add to collection. It's going to be my 2021 sketches. Now, little fireflies, you know, fireflies don't live all that long. So maybe we need to have something about their livelihood. Life equals random 200 to 1000. All right, so my little bugs have got a limited lifetime. And what I might want to do is alive. True. So they start out alive, and then they've got a little lifetime. So I'm only actually going to draw and modify by bug if it's alive. If alive, put that in there. If bug.alive, Draw bug and modify bug. Oh, someone said I should set the number to 10 million. Uh-oh. Ah, true is not defined. It's that kind of true. Sorry. I was thinking in Python. If I set the numbers here too high, it takes too long to draw each frame. So if I have 100,000 bugs, it chugs along. It's taking too long to draw them. So 10 million would not be, uh-oh. Now Firefox is having some trouble. Am I back? I might have made a huge mistake. Oh, someone in the chat really sniped me with that one. It caused my Firefox to really get stuck. Come on, reload. Okay, objectified glow bugs, we're back. Oh, but I lost my lifetime in life. I'll have to do it again. Life, random, 200, 1000. And alive, oops, I need a comma on that. Alive is true. Okay, if bug.alive. Okay, for let bug of bugs. If bug's alive, we'll draw it and modify it. And this should work just fine. Phew, got all my, I'm gonna save it this time. My bugs are moving around, but over time, bug.life minus equals 1. So over every frame, they're gonna lose a bit of life. And if bug.life is less than 0, they're going to die. Bug.alive equals false. It's a tough life to be a bug. Bug dies. Bug ages. So my little bugs, over time, should start to disappear. This is a bit of a sad sketch, isn't it? Little bugs all winking out until there's only a few little bugs left. All my bugs are gone. So I think this little sketch was a demo of creating your own objects and using that to add a lot of properties to something within your sketch. And that's something you might start to want to do in your assignments and in your major project, is that once you've got a lot of something, or even a couple of them, it's good to assign properties to that sort of thing and use kind of general functions to operate on them. So I was able to have a general function for operating on bugs, no matter where the bug was, and a general function for modifying bugs. I guess I could take this a step further and add those functions into the object definition, but I think that that would look a bit inelegant. I think this works well enough for this type of sketch, so I don't need to make it more complex than this. So we now know how to create objects, we know how to get properties, set properties, we know how to add extra properties to an object so we can use them, adding this life property and the alive property. And we created a little poignant little ode to fireflies with these objectified glow bugs. So I will see you folks when we get to Thursday, keep working on your labs this week. Make sure you start assignment 2. I will be starting to do my reminder messages on the Discourse forum next week after you get the marks back for assignment 1. You will get your marks back through GitLab, but also I'll send you a message on Discourse which will have your mark written down and your feedback. So it's a nice way to get that feedback directly into your brain so you can apply it into your second assignment. All right, folks, see you later.